Okay, we are live. Blah, blah, blah. Microphone check, check. Are you there? Still waiting?
Yep.
There you are. Okay, so we're going to start the show in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, this is Joseph Leo, and you are listening to Mage the podcast. It's a podcast dedicated to Mage the Ascension, a role-playing game from White Wolf. And joining us on today's show is Chris Zach. He's the host of the very excellent Twin Cities by Night podcast, and we'll be talking about plot hooks that you can use in your next Mage Chronicle. Chris, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, sir. It's much appreciated, man.
You know, I've been really looking for this interview because I think about 2, maybe 3 months ago, I got turned on to the Twin Cities by Night podcast, which is the show that you host, and I binge listened to that podcast. Like I would listen to about 2 or 3 episodes every day, and I think there's 170 episodes so far.
Yeah, there's like 100 and I think we're at 169 at the moment.
All right, I can't wait to talk about that. But before we do a little pre-show chatter here, if you want to participate in today's show, you can text us any questions or messages that you have. There's a in-app messaging system, and we will respond if we can. And also, I want to thank John P. He sent us a testimonial. He said that he just wanted to let us know that he's listening, and he greatly enjoys the show and the Twitter feed. The guests are great. The shows on Theme and Lexicon are fantastic. And Adam, my co-host, he's great, so please keep it up. So, John, thanks so much. And if you are listening to today's show and you like what you hear, I ask that you go to iTunes and give us a rating, leave us a review. It really does help people find us on iTunes because it notches us up on their algorithm. And, you know, if you listen to, say, Twin Cities by Night, it might say, hey, you might also like Mage the podcast. Also, I want to talk about our Mage Twitter Chronicle. I've been running it for the last couple of weeks, and you can find it on Twitter at #MTRPG. And the singularity has happened 2 years from now, and it has devoured the world into itself. And it's up to our heroes to stop it from happening. And there are other players who will be joining the game in the next few weeks, but so far who we have playing is Archie Carlisle. He's an orphan, and he focuses magic through the doodles he draws. And he recently had a dream where he was sketching a mother and child, and while drawing them, they faded into dust, and then Archie himself turned into dust. There's also Amira Musan. She's a Syrian virtual adept living in Canada who's been contacted by her chantry to bring a former member of the chantry back into the fold to fight the singularity, and that person is Elon Musk. Also, Victor Joseph Kinzer, who is the host of the excellent Walking Away from Arcadia podcast, and also our guest from 2 weeks ago, he will be joining the game, hopefully this Sunday, and he will be playing a Syndicate Mage, and I'm very excited to have him aboard. Okay, that's the pre-show chatter. So, Chris, before we begin, talk to us about the White Wolf RPG's gameplay and media Facebook group, of which I am a part of.
Yeah, definitely. So the White Wolf RPG media and gameplay group is a group that me and a gentleman named Slavic from Twin Cities by Night started about 1.5 years ago. And what we were kind of, the whole thought process behind when we created it was from when we first started Twin Cities by Night. I really found that when you to one of the hardest things to do when you have an actual play or content or whatever that deals with the World of Darkness is to try to share it so you can grow your audience. And I found that while yes, sharing it on Reddit or the Onyx Path forum or on Facebook groups was awesome, and we did pick up listeners and viewers there, we also found though we kind of dealt with 2 kind of issues. One was eventually your post kind of gets drowned out, especially on the Facebook groups where there's thousands of people posting different questions, and that that's what those groups are for, nothing against that. But also you deal with this weird passive aggressiveness for some people. Some people don't want to see people's actual play content, or they say snarky remarks about little stuff or whatever, which is fine. That's the risk that we all take when we share what we do out into the internet. I'm an adult, I understand that. So one thing that the one thing though that me and Slavic were always talking about is man, I wish there was just an area, something that you could just share your stuff on, and when it gets found out, and we could just kind of make it almost like a Netflix of White Wolf, game content. And so we eventually started the Facebook group, and at first it was just me, scouring the internet. And for those of you listening, who may be content creators, you've probably been been contacted by me on like YouTube or on Twitter, like, hey, you should come and share your stuff. But at first it was just me finding stuff and sharing it. And eventually I was like, you know what? Like, while this is fun and it's cool, to find this stuff, I really feel like it'd be awesome if the content creators were the ones coming and sharing their stuff and kind of like building a relationship with the people who, sell their product, for lack of a better term, even though we're not selling anything. And so we started it. And, I remember it was like, I remember being super excited with Slavic when we hit like 100 members, and like Matthew Dawkins, the German gamer, was someone who joined, and I was just like, oh wow! Like at that time, 100 members seemed like mind blowing. Like I never thought it would happen, and then like 1,000 just seemed like, oh, we're not gonna ever get to 2,000. Now we're at over 2,000 members strong, and daily there are people sharing their content, which is really awesome. I love it. I go on there and I share my stuff, and I love seeing other people share their stuff. And now, even with the new like topic feature that Facebook groups have, we can now tag like certain topics, like the game it talks about, or if it's an actual play, or if it's a podcast, or Twitch, or YouTube. So now even more people can find stuff, like if they're like viewers are going on there, content consumers are going on there. So yeah, that's what originally it started as, and it's just like really is, it swells my heart with with pride, like seeing how much it's growing, because I'm a firm believer that there's like vast amounts of room for everyone to share their stuff. I'm not one of those people who are like, oh, there's not that much room, we can't all be like creating content. No, there's a whole ether out there for us to create stuff. And I'm a firm believer in a high tide rises all ships. And so that's the group is like my way of like trying to positivity and add to the scene rather than take from it, if that makes sense.
And I also like, no, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I was just saying that's a long answer. Long. I kind of went off there, but yeah, that's it right there.
Well, that's exactly what I was looking for. And one of the things I really admire about the group is the fact that it is so well moderated. I have myself have been moderated more than a few times, but I appreciate it because it shows the attention to detail and the love of the White Wolf line that goes into your Facebook group.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, every new content creator is just a thing. You know what I mean? You got to get a feel for the ground, and everything like that. But yeah, we really take pride, and like now it's just not Slavic and I. Now we have like Josh Heath, who people know from like high level games and Werewolf the podcast and all the Storytellers Vault stuff, who's won the mods, and then Tillman and Andrew, who are from Twin Cities by Night, are also mods. And we now we approve all posts when they come in, and we watch the comments. We don't want any negativity going on. They're not saying there can't be healthy like discussion or whatever. We just don't want it to become like unfortunately how the internet can be sometimes. And we just want to keep it to where every content creator has an even standing field when they share their stuff, including me. Like I don't try to exploit the group for my stuff that's on there. I just want everyone to have the same level field and to grow, and it's awesome, and it's really cool. What really I think the all the credit should go to the content creators and the members. You know what I mean? Like we're simply just like clicking approve or disapprove, but it's the people who actually are taking their time to share their stuff on there, or the people who are actually going on there and like giving thumbs up to posts and commenting. Like like you said earlier about iTunes reviews and stuff like that. Like all that helps. All this stuff helps. If you like the content, it helps. And so to the people who are members of the group, like thank you so much. It really, like I said, swells my heart. And to the content creators like you, like seriously, you guys are the reason why the page keeps growing. So
Now, you and I have mentioned your podcast, Twin Cities by Night, several times. So let's get into that. Tell us about that podcast.
yeah, so Twin Cities by Night, originally what had happened, and excuse me for I'm gonna go off on a little tangent here, but it kind of goes back to like 2000. You see, I never really grew up playing like role-playing games, not for a lack of wanting to. It was just a lack of finding anyone to play with. I was a military brat, so I moved around a lot, and I remember like I got my hands on like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition, and I just remember like reading through the book and like making like rolling characters, but never finding anyone to play with. So fast forward years later, when I think I was like 20 years old or something like that in the military, and I just happened to meet someone who was playing Vampire the Dark Ages. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I got into the game and I ended up finding out about Vampire the Masquerade. This was right when Revised Edition came out. And I just kind of like really just got into it. And for about a year and a half, I ran a game. And then I just kind of burnt myself out. Like my books got stolen. And I was just kind of like, okay, this is a sign that it's time to move on. And I never thought about tabletop role-playing games again until like 2015 or 2016. I think it was 2016. For another hobby of mine's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was in the middle of like a real brutal weight cut, like trying to like get my weight down to where I needed to be for a tournament. And when I'm going through that, it's a real hard one. I try to find things that numb my brain. Like I'll watch like comedies, or just find something that just like comic books, or where you don't have to put too much thought into it, and it just kind of like distracts you. And I would just a thought popped in my head about the Vampire the Masquerade Clan novel series that was pushed back then. And I just was like, man, I wonder if that game's still around. And yeah, like months later, I'm like hitting people up online about running a game that I used to run 20 years ago, and that ended up being Twin Cities by Night. And so, I started running the first two story arcs of that, but then we kind of expanded into other games because I found out there's all these other games that I never got to play or had come out since I had last been into Vampire. So, we've ran, let's see, we have our core game, which is Twin Cities by Night, which, the channel was named after, but we've also ran a Chronicles of Darkness game called The Ultimate Evil. We've ran a Sabbat game called Wars on Fire. We have a Victorian Age vampire game called Diluted that another one of the people who played in Twin Cities by Night ran. We have a Changeling the Lost game called Vanity, which we're currently in the middle of, that another player is running. And then we just started Twin Cities by Night again with our third story arc. And tomorrow, we're about to start a Hunters Hunted 2 game called Corruption that's going to be ran by a gentleman named Andrew. But on top of that, I kind of heard awesome podcasters like you and tons of other professionals who are out there, and I was like, man, I would really like to take a stab at this podcast, like running like a topic podcast thing. And so I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll try to invite like content creators to kind of like educate me and maybe listeners on certain subjects. So I started what's called the Brian Diaries, where we have like guests and they'll come and kind of, like I said, educate us. And then finally I have like this little thing I do whenever I get a wild hair at my butt called the Brian Book Club, where I'll take like a horror book or something in the horror genre and kind of make like a little 10-20 minute podcast video about how it can be used to inspire storytellers and players in World of Darkness, in horror settings. So that's about it. Yeah, so it's just something that has brought much joy in my life, and I've met some good friends through it, and it's again, it's been a blast to do it, and hopefully I'll do it for a long time. So
Well, I'm really, really enjoying the show, and I'm learning a lot. And one of the techniques that you and your fellow storytellers will do is periodically throughout the game, you will ask the players what's going through their minds, and it really embellishes the show. That's a fantastic technique.
oh, thank you. Yeah, it's one that took me a little bit to learn, but especially when especially I think I started picking that up either in the Ultimate Evil or Wars on Fire, where like, because I started realizing, thinking about it, it helps me out obviously as a storyteller, right? Because it's like you get to know what their characters are thinking, you can kind of like adapt the story around there. But also, I think when I first did the first two arcs of Twin Cities by Night, it was my pals and I playing online, and it just happened to be we were sharing it. And then I think I became more cognitive of the fact that there are people listening, and they may be wondering like what's going on in these characters' minds. So that's why I started asking that, and I actually love it because it's starting to be like I was joking around with our last Twin Cities by Night Dread session where I feel like a psychiatrist at times, like I'm like, how's this make you feel? And they tell me, and then I'll be, oh, okay, this, and it's like I really think it expands on these characters, because I think throughout time with our different story arcs, me as a storyteller and the players have learned to kind of like focus more and more and more and bring these characters that we have more to life, if that makes sense.
And the other thing that I really like about your show is that the players really embrace the consequences of their actions. Because I think a lot of people, including myself, I want what's best for my character, and I tend to avoid anything that's going to, I don't know, bring them down. But your players really embrace it, and it really enhances the story.
Yeah, I definitely think the reason why that happens is because I think, like I said, I've had 2 years. We're a little over 2 years now, 2.5 years. We've been gaming together, and I think we all realize that we all want to tell like a horror story together. Like that we really embrace the horror side of the World of Darkness. Now, I'm not saying we're like edgelord and we're just doing stuff for shock value or anything to that extent, but we are really trying to like tell a story that's horror. And I think one of the ways that you do that is realize that your character is going to probably be in a situation that is going to, lack of a better term, scare the crap out of you, or put you in a dangerous situation, and you might not come out on the other end. And I'm really, like you said, it's really, I really respect that, and it really, brings, I think, shows me that like the core reasons why, and I hate to use the term success, not to sound pretentious or whatever, but like the reason why some people enjoy our stuff is more so because of the players, and their characters than the stories that I come up with. Because I mean, dude, like these guys constantly are like making me elevate my game as a storyteller to like to stick to their level of role playing. Like I can't slack off. I have to like be on it because these guys are taking it seriously, and I'm internally grateful for these gentlemen because without them, like I don't think anyone would be listening to Twin Seas by Night. Definitely.
One of the other things I enjoy about the podcast, and you mentioned this, is that it is a horror podcast, but you bring about the horror judiciously. It's not there for shock value all the time. And so when you do bring it, it hits hard. And I've heard some very disturbing things in your podcast, but the one I think that shook me the most is that there was a woman in your Dread Chronicle who had something written on her forehead, and she scrubbed her forehead with a Brillo pad and exposed a thin layer of yellow fat just beneath the flesh, and that just really got under my skin. No pun intended.
Yeah, yeah, man. Thank you for that. By the way, like hearing comments like that really makes me realize that like people appreciate it. So thank you first of all for that compliment. Yeah, it's I did a Brian Diaries episode with Brendan Carrion from Full Metal RPG, who I know you follow too, and he was talking about like horror, and I'm gonna butcher what he said, but basically it's like not feeling comfortable. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes it's the smallest things like that. Mind you, it's not normal for someone to bridle pad their forehead, but if people follow the story, this lady had been through some pretty traumatic stuff, and her dominator, she was a ghoul. Her dominator had used forgetful mind to get her to forget about what traumatic events happened to her, and then and she went off with her life. And the players actually witnessed this. The other characters saw this, and they weren't comfortable with what this other character had done. And then fast forward on the story, and that character is missing, presumed dead, and the remnants of forgetful mind is starting to wear off on her, and she started like subconsciously starting to realize what had happened to her. And the reason why she was scrubbing her forehead is because someone had wrote something on black sharpie on her forehead, and she doesn't know why she's doing it, but she's doing it. And one of the players who witnessed the original, when forgetful mind was used on her, saw her doing that. And there's this clear like horror realization by not only the players, but like sounds like you and maybe other viewers, is that anything that like kindred touch will get corrupted. You know what I mean? Like anything. Like you may think that you're helping someone out by giving some of your vitae or something like that, but fundamentally in their core, they're never going to be the same. And and I think that's horrific. I think that especially for players, you're like, crap, I'm playing this character and I'm trying to make these right decisions to keep my humanity, and I'm seeing these like inadvertent consequences that are happening because of decisions, and like I could be the person who's affecting someone like that. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And I want those moments to be impactful and to be built up and to have a meaning behind them, rather than just, like you said, just having to be, just meaningless violence or meaningless horror. Have it really impact some moral of the game. Definitely.
So before we get into the meat of our topic here, I want to just mention my favorite Chronicle that you've run, and that's the Wars on Fire Requiem game, which I understand that was just meant to be a hack and slash adventure.
Yeah, Wars on Fire, right? Holy shit. Originally it was meant to be a hack and slash adventure. What was going on at the time is I had ran two story arcs of Twin Seas by Night in a row, the Negligence story arc and the Homecoming story arc. And I mean, all together I think it was like 13 sessions, 14 sessions, and I just kind of needed like a break, especially at the end of the Homecoming one, because it had a really like complicated ending that had like a lot of moving pieces. And I was like, for like the last 3 or 4 sessions of that, I was like really like nervous and really, just it's mentally draining when you're like hoping this doesn't just fall flat on the players. So Slavic was like, hey, like we should do a Sabbat arc. And I was like, yeah, let's do a little quick, hack and slash Sabbat arc. And you guys can fight in combat because we've never had any combat in Twin Cities by Night, any of the the Twin Cities by Night games. And so I was like, yeah, let's just go ahead and do this. And we had this character creation session. And originally, I told the guys, I'm like, I don't want to know anything about your characters. We're gonna have these rules where we make these human characters, and then we're randomly gonna roll dice to find out what clan you are. And there's rules for that in the revised Storytellers guide. So everyone's like, all right, cool. We show up for this character creation session, and it's on our podcast and on our YouTube channel. And I'm just like starting to, I'm like, wait a second, these guys aren't making like combat characters. Like it's like the geriatric club. Like one was like an old, yeah, one was like an old ranching grandmother who's like had an abusive husband who's dead and ungrateful kids, except for one good kid who died in World War I. And then you had this old guy who hated that old lady who was a World War I vet. And then you had like this eugenics East Coast debutante fake guy who wanted to pretend like he was intelligent, really wasn't. And then you had like this wannabe native Aztecian like native rights, but he was just a poser, just using that to cause trouble. And you had all these like characters that were like real. I don't want to say real. I mean, we're playing make-believe vampires. I'm not trying to sound, again, pretentious, but they weren't like, I'm Johnny Hacksaw with my, you know what I mean, with my katana swords. And eventually that story, I started realizing, like, I think it was like even like by the first or second session of that story, I was like, oh man, the third session, and when I say session, they're like 3-hour blocks, so they're like, 3-chapter podcast or whatever. It was when I started realizing, like, oh man, this is like going to be a serious story. So I started adding on to like the story I originally planned, and then it just kind of grew into this like deep, like philosophical game about like evolution into a K-Knight and just like trying to hold on to your humanity. And one more thing about wars before I don't ramble, but like I remember when we started that game, I was always teasing like, hey, your character may die, and we had like these backup template characters for if someone's character died, and eventually the threat didn't quite go from characters dying, but it became more of like losing yourself to the beast and losing your humanity and going into wassail. Like people were like, shit, I'm like gonna lose my, that was the biggest threat than dying, and it was like really like it really became something special. And so yeah, that was a game where I think our group and me as a storyteller really turned a lot of corners with and that's I think like the game where there's a lot of times at the end of sessions with that game where we just be like, man, we feel like we're gelling, like just everything is like a like an engine, just every piston is running well. So yeah, that was a fun story, definitely.
It is, and watching the characters being stripped of their humanity was really unnerving. And I said this before, I really wish, I know you're busy, but I really wish you'd write a screenplay for Netflix or adapt it as a comic book or a novel, because that was just fantastic.
Dude, yeah, I was talking to the guys about that when you originally said that on Twitter, and that the graphic novel idea would just sound so rad. And we like I'm in the back of my head now because of you. That idea is like rattling around, so I'm like thinking about who knows, maybe one day, White Wolf reps, if you're listening, holler at us, man. What I mean? Like it was yeah, man, thank you, I appreciate that. I got to explore a lot. I mean, you get to explore a lot of things in the Sabat game that you can't really explore in a Camarilla game. It's like this. It's a really philosophical. There's a lot of philosophical ideas there. About like belief systems and just the core of who you are. And so, if you're listening, folks, I hope you enjoyed that game like Joe did and like I did. So definitely.
Okay, so let's transition from vampires to mages. Now, we're going to talk about plot hooks today, and for people who might be new to role playing, what is a plot hook?
So plot hook is basically, well, how I look at a plot hook is like the core of a story arc that you want to tell, you know, you want to tell with your friends while playing the game. Like in White Wolf games, it kind of say like the Chronicles, like overall, like the overall arching, like I guess you playing with your characters, but inside a Chronicle, there's different like story arcs, and that's how we kind of look at it in our group. You know what I mean? Like, well, like Twin Cities by Night's a Chronicle, but we have had 2 previous story arcs, and now we're having a third one. That's how I look at it. So plot hook is like your original core that the story arc is built around, like the like what you want to tell, if that makes sense. That's how I view it, at least.
So you've given us an example for Wars on Fire of some of the plot hooks you used there, but tell us what some of the other plot hooks you've used in some of your other chronicles that have proven really effective.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So for the first Twin Cities by Night Negligence, the plot hook that I wanted there was to show that, to show just how depraved Kindred can be. Like, because Twin Cities by Night Negligence, and I'm not going to spoil too much about it, but was mainly like an introduction story to Vampire the Masquerade that had 3 players who had never played it before. They had read the books, but they had never played it, and 1 player who had played it many, many years ago. And so I really wanted that story to kind of like take a deep, 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 deep dive to focus on like certain aspects of the game that we often ignore, like ghouls, and like how a lot of people just see them as a dot of retainer. So it really kind of focused on just like the whole vampires are corrupt, and no matter what you do, like you're corrupt. And so that's what Negligence was about. Homecoming was more the plot hook that I had with Homecoming was I want when someone with power thinks that they are doing something for the right reason and it ends up causing trauma and pain for others. And so that's what Homecoming was about. I don't want to get too deep into it, but that's what I really wanted, just to show with someone who thinks they're doing right, who has the power to do something like that, and they're able and it has unforeseen consequences and they have to live with that. The Ultimate Evil, which is that Chronicles of Darkness game, that is straight based on the Satanic Panic of the 80s, and which kind of impacted Bismarck, North Dakota, which is a town that my parents were from. So it was really fun to tell a story like that and kind of wrap around. And that was one that where I was like, I want this to be a story with real people, with no supernatural people, and that have real people problems and who are slowly exposed to the supernatural and how they'd handle that. And then Wars, like I said, Wars eventually was a hack and slash game, but eventually I kind of like changed it to be about like evolving from a human, and if you're willing to go along with that evolution or you're going to fight it. And then Dread, I don't want to say too much about Dread because that's currently going on, but Dread is about I ripped off the name Dread from a Clive Barker short story in Books of Blood, where it's about fear and like kind of just seeing it out of the corner or the peripheral of your vision, and like feeling like you're like everything around you is making you feel the sense of dread. And so that's like really what I'm trying to push with the story Dread, and thus the Brillo pad scene. That was one way I wanted one of the characters to feel when he saw that. So.
Well, let me ask you this, because anyone who has run a game has had this problem where things go off the rails. So how do you bring the focus back to the plot hook? Or do you just let it run and see where it takes you? Or both?
I do both. Really, I do. I look at like, and especially Wars really taught me this, that it's 50% me and 50% the players, if not more, the 75% players and 25% like I'll come up with this overall backbone. Like I'll kind of usually come up with like a beginning, middle, and end of a story, and then throughout those segments I'll like have little scenes that I hope to happen, and I'll have like a list of scenes typed out, like bullet points or whatever, and then I'll just kind of like let where the players like go and how they react. I don't want to like really railroad them too much, but like for example, the church scene with Mitch, the La Zambra in Mexico in Wars on Fire, that was just Mitch asking if there was a church, and I had to like make up that, you know what I mean, the church and the NPC on the top of my head. It wasn't like a scene that I had planned out. And there's a lot of other scenes like that in Wars. You'd be surprised that weren't like ones that I planned, But sometimes you got to let the kind of the player like go off a little bit on their own, but you can always easily, and I tell storytellers this all the time, you can always easily remind a player, and I don't mean like out of character, like, hey dude, you're off the beaten path, but you can always remind a player or a character that there's an overall point to the story. They may veer off, let them run a little bit, and then you have something happen in the story that kind of pushes them a little bit back on the path. Not railroading, but just kind of like a reminder. But to be honest, that's the beauty of these stories, right? That's like that's why I love White Wolf games so much. Like I can come up with this, but these characters, they tell the story with you. And so if they want to like grow these characters, as long as they're not like being murder hobos and like, you know what I mean, like being outrageous, like doing outrageous stuff, then yeah, I'm willing to let them run around, because I know in the end they'll respect the story enough to like want to tell it with me.
So what advice would you give to a storyteller that would really make a very compelling plot hook? What are some of the elements that go into a good plot hook?
I would say my first thing I would say is a plot hook should be something that brings excitement to you as a storyteller. There's different ways of being a game master, storyteller, whatever. I by far am not an expert of it, but one thing that I've seen some, and mainly this is like DM, like outside of Vampire or World of Darkness games, but I've seen some DMs say is, oh, I'll ask my players what kind of story they want, and then I'll make a story about that. and this, I mean, if that works for you, that's 100% cool. I'm not saying that's wrong, but for me, I couldn't do that. I couldn't ask a group of players like, "Hey, what do you want to play? What kind of story?" And if it's just not something I don't feel passionate about, I'm not going to put like that love into it. This is all labor of love for all of us. Your podcast is a labor of love. My podcast games is a labor of love. So if I don't feel that passion for it, my players aren't going to get the best experience that they can. So how I work it is I'll think of a plot idea and I'll be like, okay, like I want to tell a story in 1987, Bismarck, North Dakota, Satanic Panic, and then I'll shoot the idea to potential players, and I'll be like, hey guys, I'm thinking about running a game that's gonna be very character driven. It's gonna be a Mortal Chronicles of Darkness game, and it's gonna be based off the Satanic Panic in the 80s. And it's going to be set in Bismarck, North Dakota. Would you guys be interested in that? And they'll say yay or nay. And if they are, then you really find when they're like, yeah, I'm down for that, they're really going to create characters that are going to help your story blossom even more. So
No, you said that you started getting role playing games when you in the military, when you were young man, when you were a military brat, but you didn't really get to play them. Uh, Typically, in your podcast, you're mostly the storyteller, although there are a number of players who've also taken on the responsibility of the storyteller. Is that the role that you feel most comfortable in, or do you prefer to be a player?
I mean, to be honest, I prefer to be a storyteller by far because I always like when I played in the Victorian game, I played in the Changes in the Lost game, I'm about to play in the Hunter's Hunted 2 game, and I always feel nervous when I play, and it's not. I always feel like I'm worried about like getting too much, like taking too much time from a scene, or you know what I mean, like taking away time from other players and stuff like that. So it's like I prefer storyteller because it scratches that creative itch, man. Like I really have a side of me that's like a caveman knuckle dragger side where I do like knuckle dragger kind of stuff, but I also have like this side of me where it's like I want to like see the product of like my hands and my imagination, and storytelling does that for me, and it brings much joy in my life, and I'm really grateful to have that opportunity to do that. So.
Well, you were in that Victorian vampire chronicle, and the character you played, who was very full of himself and something of a coward, and I think he was a kind of a rotund guy. So you played that character really well.
Yeah, yeah. Herschel Buckman. He was a yeah. It's funny that we're gonna be talking about Mage too, and that character because he was based off kind of some like loosely based off like real people, and yeah, I really had fun with that character because I felt like with that character, and thank you Quinn by the way for letting me play that character like that. If you're listening, he's the guy who story told Victorian Age Vampire Diluted. But yeah, I really felt like I could really explore like some of the creepy aspects of not only being a horrible fucking human being, but being a horrible kindred, And I'm again not like murder hobo kind of shit, but like, excuse my French by the way if I'm cursed, I don't mean to.
It's all right.
Okay, cool. I should have asked before we started, but like, yeah, I got to explore just some of the eeriness of vampire, and that was one character, to be honest with you, that at times I was really uncomfortable to play. You know what I mean? Like, I really like I would do a scene with him, and I would just kind of feel like guilty, but there's nothing that makes it more worth it though when like fellow players like Andrew who would be like, I fucking hate the character, but I love him at the same time. Like the concept, you know what I mean? How he came across. He hates who he is, but he loved how the concept came across, and so that was really a fun experience. So thank you for that.
Well, let's talk about magic because it's related to Mage. And the other thing I really appreciate is your approach to magic in your own games is that it's not flashbang, woo, I'm throwing a fireball. It's something that's just very unnatural, very unsettling, and very creepy. And it's actually, I find the magic that you use in your game is actually very subtle and downplayed.
Yes, yes, yes. We get to talk. I've been looking forward to talking about this. Like, yeah, man. I really like take huge inspiration about magic from like the horror genre, especially like Clive Barker in ways, and just like I'm not like a big H.P. Lovecraft fan to be honest, but I get the gist of like weird fiction and kind of like that creeped out vibe it gives people. But yeah, I really like to treat magic as something that just doesn't sit right and is not big flashbang and like brings like just eeriness and like a nauseating feeling to like a nauseating feeling. It just makes you feel like that something just isn't settled right, you know? Like I remember reading an H.P. Lovecraft story years ago, and I can't remember exactly what story it was, but it was about a gentleman who kept hearing like rats in the wall and was like I think living like in an attic in some house. Of course, it takes place in Rhode Island, I'm sure. And he was like talking about like the angles of this room, just the geometry wasn't right. I just remember like trying to wrap my head around that. Again, I'm not a big H.P. Lovecraft fan, but like just like the whole aspect of like the geometry doesn't sit right. Like if you asked me, said, "Hey, explain what that means," I'd be like, you know what I mean? The angles aren't normal, but like you can't explain it really in words. You just explain it in feeling. And I just almost imagine like when I read a line like that and try to convey something like that, I imagine like that little nauseous feeling you get when you think you might be sick, or like you have some like kind of nasal fluid like going dropping in the back of your sinuses or something like that, just like that little uncomfortable feeling. That's what I try to do with magic, because I don't want anyone. It shouldn't be where anyone could be like, "Oh, that dude's a magician," because they should be laughed at if someone says that. You know what I mean? But that dude doesn't sit right, So that's how I try to treat the Tremere, especially in our game. Like I try to cut down like on the hocus pocus stuff, for lack of a better term.
Quick sidebar: The Rats in the Walls by H.P. Lovecraft is actually one of my favorite short stories by him, and I'll explain why. Because when I was a teenager in Indiana, I got one of the omnibus books by H.P. Lovecraft, and that was the first story. And so I was working at a restaurant, and I'd get home, and I would crack open that book and start with that story. And at the time, there was a chipmunk or a squirrel or something in our house, or some sort of rodent. And as I was reading it, I heard scratches in the walls. It was very disturbing. And then shortly afterwards, I moved to Boston. And so I was unpacking stuff. I'm like, oh, H.P. Lovecraft. I never got to finish that story. Let's start from the start. And what happens as soon as I'm reading it? What do I hear late at night? Rodents in the walls. Just yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Mage. Let's talk about magic. Let's talk about Mage. Let's talk about plot hooks. What are some of your ideas that people could use for plot hooks in their own Mage Chronicles?
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. Because once we're all done with the vampire stories in our game, I'm running a mage game. I've already
Oh,
talked to the
good.
players about that. Yeah. Like, I'm taking the fucking. Dude, for all you mage players and storytellers, like, kudos to you. By far, kudos. You guys are probably. Your skills blow away mine, because it's such a complicated game, but such a fucking awesome game. Mr. Bricado, if you're listening, like, seriously, Mage 20 is a fucking rad book, and kudos to you, and I'm glad that my buddies got me to read it. So, when I tried to read Mage 20th like a year ago. I bought it and I tried to read it and I loved it, but I just couldn't, like, I had to put it down. I don't know why. You know what I mean? It was just like I felt like I wasn't absorbing it. And then I picked it up again about 6 months later, or excuse me, about 3 months ago. And when I started reading Mage 20th again, I was listening to a podcast called Last Podcast on the Left, and I was listening to a 4 or 5 part series about Jim Jones and Jonestown. And for those of you not listening, like, Jim Jones is was like a cult leader who basically moved his people to this small town, and I believe it was South America or Africa, and then committed mass suicide with a bunch of his people when kind of like the walls were coming in on him. I'm overly simplifying it, but that's the case. But so I was reading that then, and I was just like, man, I was thinking of like the 60s and the 70s. And the 60s, the late 60s, or mid to late 60s, and the 70s were really a fucking chaotic time in our country. You know what I mean? Like, not only did we have like the civil rights stuff going on, and we had like the Vietnam War going on, but we had like such a crazy fucking number of people who were like cult leaders, and we had all these serial killers that were just like coming out of the woodwork and just like doing all this insane shit. You know what I mean? We had like the Mansons, and we had the Summer of Love, and we had like these politicians like JFK in the 60s who just kind of like were really charismatic, and his brother, all these charismatic people, bad and good, were coming out into the limelight. They went from a very like post World War II, like clean cut, everything's cookie cutter world, to just like everything became chaos. And when I was reading Mage 20th, and I was listening to this podcast about Jim Jones, and they had these really disturbing parts where they were playing actual recordings of Jim Jones talking to his people. He's a total fucking asshole in real life. All hopped up on meth and all these fucked up drugs, and just was abusing his people. But you heard this man talk, and you like literally heard him fucking talk, dude. And you hear him talk to these people, and you knew that there was something special about him. And I'm not in any fucking way this guy. He was a huge asshole, but there was something about him that was able to pull all these people and have them relocate from the United States into this jungle and cultivate it. And so I told myself, I said, man, I want to run a story, a Mage story in the 60s. I want to run a Mage story that tells what I feel is the ultimate moral of Mage. You know, reading Mage 20th, one thing that really sold me on the game is the fact that the horror aspect of Mage is when you give people who think they know what's right for the world the power to change the world, you know? And like the vast majority of these people are not going to be make the right decisions, or they're going to make foolish decisions thinking it's the right decision. So I was telling myself, what if I ran a technocracy game where during the chaotic times of the 60s and 70s, there's this team that has to um, deal with these real life mages, I guess. And I was in this game, I plan to use Jim Jones to be like a mage. You know, I was even thinking like, you know, Jim Jones wearing those dark sunglasses that he wore all the time. In real life, he wore them because his eyes are so bloodshot from his excessive drug use. But I was saying, what if he wears sunglasses because of a paradox backlash that made his eyes look weird? You know what I mean? And he has to cover it up. And
Oh, that's
then
so cool.
yeah, dude, right? And so I'm thinking this overall chronicle that has different story arcs, or like look at a picture of Charles Manson. Again, not condoning at all that asshole. Total monster, should not be fucking respected in any ways. But you look at the picture of him with those intense fucking eyes, man, right? And I'm just like, I think like, fuck, that's a mage, man. You know, like when you see pictures of I'm gonna butcher his name, Rasputin, and you see like pictures of him, and you see that he was a real charismatic guy. So that's what I want to do in a Mage Chronicle at first, is like tell these stories, we're taking real historic figures and making it to where they're mages, you know, and they're tradition mages, you know, they're not like Nefendi or Marauder, you know what I mean? These are like real mages who just are assholes, you know, and just make shitty fucking decisions because they think they know what's right and they have the power to change the reality there. So
Dude, I am so looking forward to that. And the way you guys pull these things together, like Changeling. You know, when I first started about Changeling, like fairies, elves, that can't be scary. But sure enough, you guys twisted it and really made it terrifying. So I can't wait to hear what you're going to do with Mage.
yeah, man, it's and a lot of it's gonna be inspired by like I'm already like to be honest, it's gonna be like 2 or 3 years before we can do this Mage game because there's a few more Twin Cities by Night and Sabbat Chronicles to wrap that story up. But I've been like doing a lot of reading about like that era and some of these folks, and then like I've been watching like the PBS Vietnam 18-hour documentary that was just released on Netflix, and watching that, just and then also like just taking heavy fictional inspiration. I think that's a lot of things. That's something that I don't know. I don't hear a lot of storytellers talk about. Is like, and I'll be the first to admit it. If I'm running like if I come up with a concept for a story, I'm gonna try to equate my concept to a tone and style of a specific writer, you know. And so Ultimate Evil was kind of like Stephen King. It, you know, like was kind of inspired by Stephen King's It, and where Juarez was kind of inspired by like Clive Barker's Book of Blood, like his body horror type stuff. But so one thing that really I've been thinking about a lot when in my mind is formulating the first foundation of this Mage story I want to tell is Clive Barker's Great and Secret Show, Clive Barker's I Magica, you know, like those Weaver World, like those stories are quote unquote magic stories. And then also reading about people like Aleister Crowley and folks like that, like Magic with a K folks, you know, just kind of what they were like in real life. So
Well, you know, this leads me to my next question because for me, Wikipedia is a storyteller's best friend. But you mentioned PBS documentaries, and you mentioned some of your favorite authors. What are some of the other sources that you go to incorporate elements into your plot hooks?
I use books and documentaries, to be honest. That's the main thing that I use. I'm one of those people where I love pages like Wikipedia, but if I read or hear something or watch something, the first thing I'm doing is going on Amazon, and that damn Amazon one button buy click is my worst enemy, man. I'll find a book and I'll look at the reviews for the books and I'll buy it. You know, next thing you know, I'm reading a book about something I never thought I'd read about. Like I'm reading a Crowley book right now. I'm almost done with it about his real life. It's actually written by the guitar player of that band Heart in the 70s, and it's a very even-keeled book about Crowley because I found like the other two books I bought about Crowley were like written by people who like were a huge fan of his, and I try to read like even balanced books where they will point out their flaws and everything like that. And yeah, it's books and documentaries through and through because like I think also like to be, and I'm gonna be frank, like maybe if I knew people weren't like watching or listening to our stuff, it was just me like playing around the table with some friends, I wouldn't put that much work in it. But I think now knowing that we have people who consume our media, that like it gives me the motivation to put that even more, you know what I mean, that little extra effort and to try to get stuff as correct as I can in the stories and historically relevant. Like for like the Ultimate Evil, that is the name. The Ultimate Evil is based off a book written called The Ultimate Evil in the 80s that was just like this. It was actually considered legitimate at the time, but it dealt with the Satanic Panic, and it was this guy pretty much like trying to push this theory that Sam Berkowitz, the Son of Sam killer, was like part of the satanic cult, and how it spanned like all across the globe. And I'll read books like that, and I'm wondering if like my wife thinks I'm going nuts or whatever. She like go in my office and see him, and I tell her like these are my game books. Like I'm just books to like get ideas for games. I don't believe any of this stuff, but it really provides a good basis for games, man, and it pays off. And I think your players see I think when players see that you put that kind of work into a story, they're gonna put that kind of work into their characters. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, Chris, I think you've really given some solid examples on what plot hooks are, how people can build upon them, what makes them really effective. Uh, Really fantastic ideas for gameplay. If people want to find out more about you, if they want to hear your podcast, where's the best place to find them online?
You can find our podcast on all the major podcast apps, iTunes, SoundCloud. Like I'm gonna repeat, like you said at the beginning of the show, like iTunes reviews. Seriously, folks, iTunes reviews mean the world. So if you enjoy Mage the podcast, if you enjoy our stuff, if you enjoy any podcast, like seriously, just taking like the 5 minutes to like go and put 5 stars and write a review will help other people discover these podcasts. I cannot stress this enough. There's only so much that promoting yourself will do. You need to, like, as a content creator, like get it to where your stuff is just happens to be discovered, and taking that little time to help out means a lot. So you can find our stuff there. You can find us on YouTube. We originally started as a YouTube channel, but by far podcasts are my favorite now, but we still put our stuff, our unedited sessions, we put on YouTube, and then we also throw like the podcast version on there for people who prefer to consume it that way. You can find us on Twitter at twin_cities_VTM. Come on by. I'm always on there, probably way too much, and you can hit me up on there. And we're also, I think we have like a Facebook page, but like it's not really that big, but you can find us on Facebook too. So
Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and please come back on the show anytime you like, because you are a source of great information and inspiration.
yeah, man, thank you for having me. Seriously, man, it's like obviously you're doing something right when you guys are doing awesome, and just seeing how you're growing and just like how many people are consuming your stuff, man. It's so rad, and so keep it up. We need more content creators, and it's awesome that you're doing this.
Oh, thanks so much. All right, folks, please join us again next week. Our guest is going to be Karen Tidbeck, and we will be talking about Mage Refuge. It's a text-based interactive game for your phone that takes place in a world at the dawn of a revolution. It's kind of like one of those choose-your-own adventures, and I've done a couple of those on my phone, and they're all right, but this was really creepy and unsettling, what with the minimalistic soundtrack and the graphics. It's awesome. You can find us online at magethepodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter at magethepodcast. You can also check out our Twitter, Mage Chronicle. Just follow hashtag MTRPG, and subscribe to Mage the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and now on the TuneIn app. And as always, please give us a review or give us a rating on iTunes. It helps other people find the show. For Chris Zach, I'm Joe Vallejo. Thanks for listening to Mage the podcast. I'll see you next week.
Drink cold brew.